Hello, Grays Lake Central 4th and 8th hour students. This is Mr. Reitman along with Mr. Plaza, and we're going to talk today about the Indus River Valley Civilization. First, keep in mind our essential question: how does where you live affect who you are?
Right, and like we've been talking about with all of our other civilizations is how the geography of that place helps the people develop. So that's what we're going to look at here with ancient India also. The ancient Indians, and even India today, they have two major rivers that they use for their farming and their travel and things like that, called the Indus and the Ganges rivers. And if you look on the map here, the area that's green, shows up right here, this is the area that is made fertile by the floods from those two rivers. And actually this picture down here is of the Indus River. The other major landform that they have is the Himalayan mountains. And these mountains are the tallest mountains in the entire world, and that gives the Indians a huge advantage, especially the ancient Indians, because they could protect themselves. It's a lot more difficult for the armies to go across a mountain than it is some of the flatlands that these other civilizations had. So the geography played a big impact on the ancient Indians.
Next, we have the climate to deal with. And one thing that we see a lot of, even in our society, is monsoons. And these are major winds, oftentimes accompanied with a little bit of rain, that mark the seasons. Now, the wet season that we're looking at was from June to October.
Now, why do you suppose they call it the wet season?
I'll bet you because it rains a lot.
Oh, it absolutely rains a lot. And we actually have a video here to show you of what a monsoon looks like. Got an advertisement. You like buying a Cadillac?
I don't know the money for that.
Oh, okay.
Hopefully that video helped you understand a little more about monsoons.
Gives you more of a visual.
Now, the timing of monsoons are important because if it arrives too late, then your crops fail. You might want to think about why that would be. Also, if it rains too much, floods wash away crops.
Right, so even though these monsoons are incredibly important for the ancient Indians, it's got to be pretty perfect for it to help them with their growing season. Because again, if it's too late, they don't get the water for their crops. If it rains too much, they get washed away. So the timing is very important. Okay, as far as early civilization in ancient India, the two major cities from this time period were known as Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. And you see the pictures here on the left side are recreations in some cases, and then ruins in other cases of these two cities. Now, the ancient Indians, the early ones at least, were known for their sophisticated city planning. And the way that they designed their cities is a way that we are very familiar with actually here in the U.S., and it's called the grid system. The name would kind of suggest, with a grid system, the streets in the cities are laid out in a grid pattern. So very similar if you go to Chicago, you notice that you go city blocks. Okay, everything's laid out in a square. If you were to take an aerial view of Chicago, it would look like a giant piece of graph paper. So that's what the ancient Indians contributed to city planning. In the middle of each of these cities, and you can see them in these pictures here, they have something called citadels. one here in the middle picture and one here at the bottom. Citadels are strong central fortresses, and if you notice, they're raised up. They're up higher than everything else. And if you're using this as a defense, it's a really good idea to have things up on top of a hill. What do you think that is, Mr. Reitman? Why would it be good to have something up on a hill?
It's probably good to have something up on a hill because if it rains, you might not get washed away.
That's a really good idea. And then also, if someone attacks you, they have to come up the hill. So you can put your defenses up on top of these hills and make it difficult for them to come through. The last thing that the early ancient Indians gave us that we kind of take for granted nowadays is plumbing and sewage systems. Before we had plumbing and sewage and people had their waste. Need to say anything more than that?
No, I don't think so.
When people had their waste, they would usually just dump it out into the streets or dump it straight into the river. So you can imagine the smell that a lot of these ancient civilizations had. The ancient Indians actually developed a system where they had these tunnels running along the side of the roads, and the water would come out of the houses, or the waste would come out of the houses into these tunnels and then out into the river. So it's actually a pretty modern idea for an ancient civilization to have plumbing systems like this.
Well, why did these disappear? There were several reasons. First of all, the floods, as we talked about. In some areas where they weren't up on a hill, they might have washed away. Invading forces, when people came and attacked, if they weren't ready to go, they could be knocked out and their areas would disappear. Major earthquakes. That part of the world also has a lot of earthquakes. If you have a serious earthquake, a lot of what you have is going to go away. Unburied skeletons could mean a disaster, but there were no written accounts of these.
Right. The early ancient Indians, we don't have an idea of what their writing looked like. We don't know how to read it. So we can't really figure out exactly what happened, but we see pictures like this at the bottom here with these skeletons. And they look to be laid out in a way that would suggest that there was a disaster, like they weren't expecting it. But again, we don't really know because they didn't have a writing we know how to decipher. So the mystery of the early ancient Indians is that we don't really know what happened to them. But either way, these early people that created those cities disappeared. The people that came in afterwards, and these are people that we do know about because of their writing, they're called the Indo-Aryans. Okay, the Indo-Aryans were nomads. And again, nomads are people who travel around to different areas, and they don't really stay in one place for very long. But these particular people came into this Indus River Valley area from the north. And their language, and you see here at the top right, was called Sanskrit. We've talked about hieroglyphics. We talked about cuneiform with the other two civilizations so far. This is the ancient Indian language, Sanskrit. Okay, very similar to the other two, you notice that there's a lot of symbols that represent sounds and words. Hundreds of different symbols here in Sanskrit. Now this picture here at the bottom left, if I asked you what that plant looked like, what would you say?
I'm seeing a soma plant.
A soma plant. Well, you're right. It is a soma plant. Now, the ancient Indo-Aryans believed that if you drank the juice from a soma plant, that they believed you were drinking an elixir of life or a drink of immortality, which means that they thought that they would live forever if they drank it. But really what soma juice is, it's a hallucinogen. Very similar to our modern day, we call them shrooms. They cause you to hallucinate. The soma plant, when you drink it, causes you to hallucinate. And so when these people thought they were just drinking a drink of immortality, they were just getting really high. So maybe they thought they were immortal, but really they were just hallucinating.
And there's something to be said for that, but probably not in this video.
Right. Okay, and then the last thing, if you look at the bottom right, we're going to talk more about these guys later on when we talk about Hinduism, but these are the Brahmins, and they're the special priests of the ancient Indian society, and they were at the top of the social ladder. But again, we'll get more into them later on.
A little bit about the Indo-Aryan society. These were light-skinned people, as you can tell in the picture in the upper right. Their parents arranged some of their marriages, but their marriage was by purchase, or capture was also allowed.
Right, so whereas we have marriage in this country where you can choose your own mate, a lot of times in these societies, the parents would get them together. You could also buy your wife if you wanted, or you could capture your wife, which is kind of interesting.
Very interesting.
A little different than today.
And then finally it brought a new social order known as a caste system, a new language which is known as Sanskrit, and religious ideas like Hinduism to India.
Right, so these people brought a lot of new ideas into the area, a lot of things that we still see today in ancient India.
Well, that concludes this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, got something out of it. Please prepare as you get ready for your quiz later next week. Have a great weekend.